Okay, so where were we? Gonna work on dippers. And unfortunately, at the same time, I had a really talented intern show up from UBC, an undergrad. Her name was Christy Morrissey. And she did some work actually on eagles with me initially in pesticide poisoning in the valley, a problem we had out here 30 years ago, 25, 30 years ago. And she did a great job in that project. And I said, would you like to do graduate work? And she said, yes. And I said, are you interested in dippers? And she said, sounds intriguing. So we started to plan a project. The first thing we needed to do was figure out where we're going to do this with all the options on the coast. And we messed around in the North Shore streams. We looked over on the island, the Solom, the Englishman. And eventually her scouting settled on the Chilliwack for a variety of reasons. The Chilliwack having a road running all alongside of it, having really productive river system and a lot of dippers on it. So we started to pull all of this together. And so this evening, I'm going to start by talking a bit of dipper biology, and I'm going to talk about Christie's initial studies on the Chilliwack, and then some other work where we've applied the use of the dipper to looking at run-of-the-river hydro and the coal mining up in the Kootenays. So yeah, dippers, they are the only truly aquatic songbird, and they breed on fast-flowing rocky bottom streams all across the West, coastal streams, mountain streams, even out into the desert streams. And they need rocky bottoms with high numbers of macroinvertebrates and nice complex system with a lot of food. They don't migrate south. They do altitudinally migrate, as you'll see, up into the watersheds and then down to lower altitudes in the winter. So, but we didn't really know that for sure at the time we started this. So worldwide, dippers are still, there's 5 species, as you can see. They haven't radiated that much. Just across the whole globe, there's only 5 species, but where they are, they've done very well and continue to do well. So you can see the white-throated is all across Asia, from Europe over into Asia. Our American dipper is well distributed all across the West. And you've got the white cap down into the Andes. All of them are doing pretty well, but they have been, like most birds, persecuted in the past for one reason or another. Apparently there was a population in the Atlas Mountains of Africa that was hunted to extinction because it was believed that they had aphrodisiac properties. I don't know what it was about them, but anyway, and I guess they were persecuted in Scotland and Germany, but in the past, because they thought they were eating too many salmon fry and salmon eggs. But for the most part, they are doing pretty well. And yeah, I think the only population that's considered threatened at all is this little rufous-throated down in Argentina, where I guess river management changes are affecting the population. But so how do they survive in winter? Like, how are they adapted? And they do have particular adaptations. They have this thick coating of feathers, and they have a higher than normal capacity for oxygen transport in the blood. They have higher concentrations of hemoglobin. And they also have a lower basal metabolic rate, which enables them to stay underwater for longer. They can stay up underwater for more than 30 seconds. And there's apparently this small population in Siberia that when it will continue to remain on these streams if they're open. And I guess they're fast enough rushing this, they're open even at minus 50 Celsius, and they feed underwater the whole time. So they're really well adapted little critter. So they are the only truly aquatic songbird, and unlike most water birds, they haven't really adapted morphologically. They don't have webbed feet. They still look like a songbird, but they do have adaptations. Their wings are shorter and very muscular and powerful, enables them to effectively swim underwater. Their bones are solid, unlike most songbirds. So they reduces their buoyancy, so it makes it easier for them to stay under. They have a very well-developed preen gland at the base of the tail for waterproofing. They have longer than normal legs and very strong claws, which enables them to grasp onto the rocks when they're feeding. So a number of interesting adaptations that you might not realize when you're watching them. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about their life history. So if you've been out on the rivers watching them, you can see them start to interact even as early as January. They start to pair up, the males and females, egg laying in March on into early April. Altitude, female incubates for 14 to 7, then they fledge 25 days later. And then those nestmates, they stay together for another week. And but the parents will continue to feed them for up to 35 days after they fledge, after they leave the nest. So, and just a little more detail about that. So January, it's so-called proximity tolerance. So before that, and like at this point, then they start to interact in a couple of months, and then they'll start courtship feeding. The male will start bringing food to the female, and he'll start singing, and they'll start singing, and then they'll start chasing each other around, having fun, forming a pair bond, and then start nesting as early as March on the lower river. The population a few weeks later, and then the female starts to nest, but both adults will 4 to 5 eggs. Incubation is 14 to 17 days and begins on the second last egg being laid. And then the female will brood those eggs for about 30 minutes to an hour and then keep regularly taking breaks to feed. So that's what they're doing during the breeding season. So yeah, the female will initiate the nest building. I don't know, has anybody seen the nest when you've been out in the river at all?
I've seen one, but I can't remember what it looks like.
Yeah, we've got some pretty good pictures. Yeah. Was it pointer?
I think I've seen the one in the top right on the Chilliwack River or something like that.
This one, yeah.
Yeah, I saw one like the middle one on top.
Like this?
Yeah, in the interior, something like him.
Yeah. So yeah, if you watch their behavior and watch where they go back to, if you're lucky, you'll see. But they're really quite a distinctive oval shaped basically mass of moss that they build. And she actually weaves a 2-layer. It has an outer layer of moss and twigs and everything, and then it's got a little cup inside of grass where it's only like 3 or 4 inches, very snug and cozy. So keeps her and the eggs warm even when the weather is really cold. Yeah, got some more pictures. Got a number of nest pictures here. I don't know if any of you know Colin Clausen, Coquitlam. This is a picture he took on the Coquitlam River. He's very active with it, mainly with the Vancouver Club, right? So, and you can see this picture, really nice picture he's got here, where he's got the adult just going into the nest. So that's a very typical dipper mossy nest. And here's some others here. And I mentioned earlier the bridges in Wales, but they'll also nest on bridges here. And everybody know Tamahai Creek? There's a nest been there for years and years under the bridge on the Tamahai. And it's a great place to see dippers feeding and breeding. And I don't know, has anybody ever seen the Nature of Things program about cold weather adaptation in Canada? The dipper that's swimming underwater in that was filmed right there at Tamahai. So we went up there with them and they put their camera device in the water. And Christine said, we'll throw some salmon eggs in, see what happens. And bird appeared in what, 15, 20 seconds? And the pictures that they have of the dipper swimming underwater and feeding are from that little, and they tried for a number of other days and they didn't get any better footage. And I don't know, what were they going to do? They were going to go up to the hatchery and then you told them they had to have a permit if they were going to feed up there. And so, or if they're going to film up there. So they lost interest. So anyway, it's quite an interesting Nature Things series about adaptation to cold weather in Canada. So there's another nest there, and then there must have been an old one on that side. And there's an old, really muddy clump one. And that's the view of the river from that nest back there. So you can see they've got a nice view of their territory and their feeding habitat. So yeah. So when you get to the nestling stage, I mean, both parents actively feed the young and they collect most of the food within a few hundred meters of the nest. And just a little interesting point, 12 days post-hatch, the legs of the nestlings are as long as the adults already. They weigh about 55 grams at 16 days, and by 17 they can swim. And at 24 to 26 days, they fledge, leave the nest. So, and then they stay within the short distance of the nest the first day. And as I said earlier, the nestmates stay together for a week, hanging around, and then both parents will continue to feed them, and they may actually split the brood. Each parent may take a couple or three of the fledglings and look after them and feed them pretty much constantly. If you've seen them out there on the river at any point with their nestlings or with their fledglings, they're very actively feeding them. You see them, the young begging and making a racket, wanting attention and wanting to be fed. It's fun to watch. So we developed them based on that early work as a bioindicator. And I mean, because they're year-round resident, they're all relatively high trophic level, feeding on quite large invertebrates and on young salmonids and on eggs. So it's pretty much established in the literature now, based on this work that we started here in the Chilliwack, that they are a really nice bioindicator of river systems. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit now more about Christie's work. So one of the first things we had to address was the population dynamics. And one thing that people knew in terms of different numbers, that on the lower reaches of the rivers where people had counted them throughout the year, there was a big influx in the winter, November to January. All of a sudden, all kinds of dippers appear. And at that point, we didn't know, nobody knew where these guys were coming from. Were they altitudinal migrants? Were they latitudinal migrants? Were they coming from all over BC down to the coast like ducks do and like a lot of raptors do? So that was one of the first things that Christie had to establish, was what was going on with these numbers. So this is the data that she ended up with eventually, showing that the numbers on the main stem of the river go way down during the breeding season, and every year they come up. So here you've got 15, 20, 30 birds, and they're going up to almost 200. So what was the story here? So we had to do a study of population structure. In order to do that, you need to be able to mark birds. So she and our field assistants managed to capture and color band. This is a lot of hard work, 250 adults, 272 juveniles, and then survey every 2 months to find every one of these color marked birds and determine where they were throughout the whole watershed. And then we also did a radio telemetry study. Well, here you can see the color bands. So you have to go out there with binoculars. It doesn't work that well with scopes, and you got to find each bird and look for its color markings and then record it. So that can tell you who's gone where, who's come from where, and you can learn a heck of a lot from such a simple technique.
How did you catch them?
Oh, we'll get to that. Should have had that in earlier, right? So yes, that's another fun. I think it's the next slide shows some of that. And here's the little radios, little called VHF, very high frequency radios that you have to track. It's not a satellite thing or anything like that. You have to track with an antenna wandering up and down or flying in an airplane, which she had to because they dispersed so far to locate some of them. We had to fly up the watershed. So these are actually some pictures from later, but you trap them by running a mist net across the river in a place where the birds are active, and eventually they'll fly back into the net. As you can see, I mean, you cannot see any sign of the net from there, so neither can the birds, and they're flying actively. And you go out there and you remove it from the net like any banding study, and bag them and take them onto shore and process them, color band them, feather and blood sample them. So these are some of the pictures from what I'm going to talk about later, the run of the river work. But again, it's showing the mist netting. You can see the two people on each side and the net running across the middle. So that's how you
turn one of those lights off, it might show up. Find it as a switch.
That one? Is that better? Leave the other one on? That's much better. Yeah, that is a lot better. You still can't see the net though. At least I can see where the poles are for sure. You can see the people. That's right. Yeah. So yeah. So this is the data that she got. So the dark blue bars are the resident birds along the river, and the light blue are what turned out to be the non-residents. And you can see the non-residents come in a big influx each winter, and then most of them go, and then they come back and forth. So that was the dynamics that she established. So basically, where were these birds coming from? So 84 to 89% of the dippers moved up into the watershed, up into the creeks, all up into the higher elevation creeks, and only 11 to 16% stayed on the lower river and bred there year round. So that's what we learned about them, what was going on. So, and that was the first time this kind of study had been done. So, and there's the creek habitat, high elevation, narrow, steep gradient, very dynamic, but lots of nesting opportunities. But as you go further up, they ice up, and it's not very hospitable habitat in the winter. Whereas the rivers, as you know from spending any time there, lower elevation, wide, low gradient, fewer nesting opportunities, which is why they like the bridges and that. And it's also channelized in parts. So yeah, and so the follow-up work, we use various techniques to study the diet and their feeding ecology, studied their breeding success, and did water quality and contaminants work. And later, some of the SFU people did basic behavioral ecology studies up there, some quite interesting work. So all of that was possible because of this color marked population. Unfortunately, the people at SFU who took it over kind of lost interest and stopped the color banding. And so we had color banded for maybe 10 years. And David Green took it over and did a few more years. So it was unfortunate. But on the other hand, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to go up there every year and trap every bird that you see and mark it and trap. You know, it takes a big commitment, and you've got to not only have the funding, you've got to have the motivation for the intellectual questions and what you want to pursue. So yeah, so anyway, but we have, and others have continued using the dipper for a lot of other applications. A colleague of mine did some work with the coal mining companies looking at selenium. Another colleague of mine in Oregon looked at mercury effects from gold mining. We did some early work in Alberta on selenium from coal mining. Christy did some work on marine pollutant transport by salmon. So yeah, a lot of interesting work done with these dippers. And then what I'm going to talk about next run of the river impacts and then more selenium stuff. So, yeah, no, I don't know how familiar anybody is with run of the river, so-called run of the river hydro development. And I don't know about you, but I always had the vague idea that somebody went out and stuck a turbine in the river, and I thought, wow, this is really low impact stuff. That's great. And I always wondered, well, what happens during low flow? It's like windmills. It can't be that reliable. Well, this so-called run of the river isn't quite what it seems. It really is just small hydro development. They more or less do the same thing. They take a watershed and they build a dam. It's just a small dam, like you can see in the picture. They're relatively small, and then they divert the water down to a generating station further down, and they produce the electricity and send it around. I don't know if you've been driving up to Whistler, if you've ever noticed some concrete and metal buildings along the side of the river and wondered what they were. Well, some of those are, I think most of them are actually the transformer stations from this type of development. There's quite a lot of it up there, which is partly where we did these studies. So yeah, this whole thing here is become quite a source of hydro here in BC. And it's come about partly because most of the easy lower altitude, easily dammed large rivers are either dammed like the Columbia and that, or people are not going to tolerate damming them like the Fraser, thankfully. And I mean, as a kind of an aside, I'm not sure if you're aware that the Columbia was the world's dominant salmon producing river, bigger than the Fraser, bigger than anywhere in Asia, but it's dammed almost from top to bottom. And I think it's 80 to 85% of the salmon stocks are lost on the Columbia. And I don't know if they're aware, there's a lot of political fighting in the US over water rights and access and what to do down there. Fortunately, as we know, most of the Fraser is not dammed, and most of our big rivers are not dammed. So we're, are the big salmon producing systems up here. That's kind of an aside. But hydro recognized, as in many montane situations, many parts of the world, that there was a huge potential here for small hydro development. So this is a report that hydro produced in 2012, showing all of the potential for run-of-the-river development in BC. And it's also eligible for green energy studies, so which is another incentive to the companies that are doing this. So we were wondering about the possible impact of all of this. By building a little dam, you're changing the flow regime, you're reducing and stabilizing it. You're potentially changing the strain physical chemistry in the reservoir and downstream. How is that potentially going to affect the ecology of the food chain, of the small salmonids and whatnot? And is that going to affect the abundance of the prey species? But there's also the potential, and that's a problem in the reservoirs everywhere, is the production of methyl mercury from the rotting vegetation. And that's something in particular we were interested in, because it's one of the things I do is ecotoxicology. So how does this happen? So basically, the reservoir floods, and the vegetation that was along in the little valley there and along the sides, and the soil starts to rot, and the mercury gets mobilized. And actually, it's not really showing here what happens. It's showing it down here in this details here, but mercury has to be converted to methyl mercury through anaerobic bacteria, so-called sulfate reducing bacteria. So the bacteria take the regular relatively non-toxic mercury, and they convert it to a toxic form called methyl mercury, and that's the one that can biomagnify in the food chain. And it's also the one that is much more toxic. So you can see this biomagnification, and at high enough levels, mercury is a serious toxin. It's a neurotoxin. It will affect behavior, the brain, but it will affect a lot of other systems as well. So it is a concern. So yeah, we set out to look at these different factors. And that's the way.
That's
Yes.
kind of a dumb question.
No dumb questions.
Who
There are
owns
no dumb questions.
BC Hydro.
Who owns BC Hydro? As far as I know, well, I think parts of it are divided up. And I think the previous government before this government, those guys, they sold off part of it, I think. They sold off the transmission, I think. But I think the production is still owned by us. I believe it's still owned by the province and therefore the people. I think they wanted to sell it.
Right.
Yeah.
Basically, what they did is they sold all the profit of it.
Yeah.
The ones that are not economical for private ones.
Mhm.
Okay, what about this big thing that they're trying to plug now, going to electricity for cars and etc. That's going to do like a whole lot of damage, isn't it?
I don't know.
And they're cutting out the natural gas and
Well, it's all climate change. It's all trying to get us off of fossil fuels, right? But they
Yeah.
also, yeah,
are you exchanging one fault for another?
well, there's no free energy. Yeah,
Right,
there's no free energy, but I think probably in the big picture, electricity generation is probably one of the least damaging. There's no easy solar. You still have to manufacture solar panels and then dispose of them afterwards. And they went ahead with Site C, right? So they have all that capacity now. And I don't know. We don't want to get too far down that road of debating. But I can understand your concerns. Yeah, it's a complicated story and political and everything else. So yeah, so we set out to study this, and what we did was we identified 7 streams in the Lillooet, Pemberton, Whistler watershed, because it's all connected up there, the Duffy Lake Road and all the different old logging roads and that enable you to connect and get back into all of these sites. And then we had 7 unregulated streams, 7 that didn't have dams on them. So that was our study design to see what we could learn about dippers and what they were feeding on and whatnot. And similar to the other study, 99 dippers were trapped the same way with the mist nets, color banded, measured, sampled, and then tracked throughout the 2 fall and winter periods to see what they were doing. Yes, doing like surveys. So hard work working up and down these streams, which is not easy if you tried it yourself. So what did we learn? Was different than we expected. Dippers don't mind these places at all. On the regulated streams, the ones with the hydro dams, there was actually increased on dipper density. And there was a significantly higher proportion of adults on the significantly high portion of dippers than the unregulated streams. Yes. So there were higher numbers of adults on the regulated streams. So yes. And higher occupancy of the abandoned dippers and a higher proportion of confirmed year round. So why? And we think that those head ponds, so-called head ponds, little reservoirs, were providing novel habitat for the birds by stabilizing the flow and providing a little pond essentially. They seem to adapt to it. But what about the mercury story? Okay, so what we've got here is the mercury concentrations on the y-axis here in parts per million, parts per billion. And not most really probably don't care what the unit is, but measuring the amount, the higher up the y-axis, the higher concentration of mercury. and then the different streams. And one of the interesting things we learned was that it was the most recently flooded streams that had the highest mercury, which, you know, probably makes sense because with time the mercury can dissipate. But we certainly showed that mercury was increasing on these regulated streams. And this is the similar story that people learned from studying beaver dams and methylation of mercury, because so beavers can also cause mercury pollution. and same thing, the most recently flooded ponds also had the highest mercury, but it does seem to dissipate with time. So that is one of the things that we learned. And here you can see that the mercury concentrations really were quite high. Let's see here, I'm gonna do that. This is the concentrations in the red are the unregulated streams, and the concentrations in the green are the regulated, so the ones with the dams. And that's that particularly high one in the black, Douglas Creek. And so that is, these are all concentrations of mercury in songbirds from all different species of songbirds from all across North America, Western North America. So you can see that the concentrations of mercury in these dippers were on the dam streams are definitely much higher. So they definitely had a lot of mercury in them. So I thought I had the standard on there. No, I gave you the wrong information. That blue is the unregulated streams. The red is the concentration above which you start to potentially have impacts of the mercury. So that's how to interpret that. So you can see the concentrations are quite high. Yeah, so what did we learn? Are these head ponds of these areas, are they actually what we would refer to as ecological or evolutionary traps? Like they look good, but are they actually good for dippers, or is it deceiving? Because they are spending time there year round as a result of these reduced, the result of the low flows and more stable food supply. So we weren't able to do a proper reproductive study because, again, that's a lot more work as well. So we don't really know. But non-adaptive foraging, it's a technical term, but it doesn't appear that is a problem. They seem to be adapting quite well to being there, and possibly mercury is a negative consequence. So that's what we learned from that study, that like so many of these things, when you look into it, it's more complex than you expect. So then the next study that we did to apply what we learned from dippers was in the Elk Valley in southeastern BC. So it's an area that traditionally had a lot of lucrative fishing and recreation industries. The Elk Valley, all that area up there, I don't know how many of you know or familiar or spent time over there. It's a beautiful area and a natural habitat for a lot of species, but it's a major coal mining region. So as of the time the study was initially done, there were 5 active open pit coal mines, and these mines are huge. You see the aerial pictures on Google Earth and whatnot. You don't actually see them from the valley. You can't see any of the mines. They're all up above and behind. They've landscaped it really well and keep it out of sight and mind. But they're employing a lot of people, producing a lot of coal, and it's producing big profits, which means a lot of tax revenue to the province, and a lot of influential companies in that tech in particular making a lot of money. So what about the impact? I mean, the problem is they create huge waste rock piles, like all kinds of mines, and a lot of minerals and other elements. And this is it's not mine, is it? It's my phone. My phone's in my pocket. On my phone.
This is anything in here?
Yeah, see, it's coming from the back.
Sorry, this is a medication and reminder.
No, that's okay. I just thought maybe it was my.
Turned on.
It didn't bother me. I just didn't
I
want to
was thinking, thank goodness it's not me for a change.
be. Well, I was thinking the same thing. It was my phone. So. Yeah, so various chemicals build up as a result of this, and particularly selenium, and gets loaded into the water reservoirs. So that's what we were interested in. There's been a lot of work up there with selenium effects on fish and concern for human health. So what is selenium? It's a non-metallic element, collects with volcanic activity, and is released into watersheds through mining, particularly coal mining. And it does have the potential to be very toxic, even though it's an essential element. And this one quote, these guys said, selenium is potential risk as an environmental toxin second only to mercury. Well, I don't know if I really agree with that, but it does have potential to be a problem. So yeah, selenium is an essential element for the maintenance of liver, heart function, all kinds of things. And production of selenoproteins involved in regulation of the immune system, all sorts of stuff. But above those minimal trace concentrations, it can cause a lot of toxicological effects. And so the province of BC has designated a guideline, as you can see here. And now these are concentrations in the streams running out of the Elk River in the mining area. So you can see they're a long way above the BC water quality guideline, and increasing constantly. This is from 2001 to 2017, those various streams. So there's a lot of mercury going into the system, and mercury, or did I say, keep saying mercury, selenium, sorry, a lot of selenium going into the system. And you can see it will biomagnify as well, going up the food chain from water up until bacteria and on up into consumers like birds. So, and this is the summary of the work that was done up there, and it is kind of a bit of a complicated slide. So we've got the selenium levels on the y-axis, and this is the concentrations in water, concentrations in the periphyton. So this is like the algae and whatnot that is clinging to the rocks, and mainly in the substratus where it was scraped off. These are the invertebrates that feed on the periphyton and on each other. And then this is in dipper eggs. So the sort of gray are the reference numbers down here. And then the black are the exposed sites. So the ones that are impacted by the coal mining. So you can see they are much higher in the water and in the periphyton through the whole food chain, in the invertebrates and in the eggs. And the red line, the dotted red lines are the water quality guidelines. So you can see in the water, in everything, they're higher. Not so much in the dippers. They don't biomagnify as much as we expected in the dippers. So there is a lot of selenium contamination up there. But here, as opposed to in the Run of the River study, we were able to do some reproductive work, at least for 1 year. And we had a plan to do 2 years, even more, but unfortunately the grad student ran into a lot of personal problems, and try as we may, we weren't able to get her into the field again for a second or a third year. But either way, so this is the comparison between the two sites. So you can see here the clutch size here, right here, and the hatching success. So you can see there's basically, what happens if we go this way? No. So there's basically no difference between the reference sites, the non-contaminated streams and the contaminated streams. So despite the very high selenium levels, it does not seem to be impacting the dippers up there. And so you can imagine that I've never talked to anybody working for the coal mining companies. We dealt with their consultants, but I'm sure they were happy to see this information. So that is what we managed to get done with the dippers in the Elk Valley. So, and it's all published and released now to everybody. So yes, I guess this is a summary here. Higher selenium levels in water and biota did not detect a significant effect of selenium on the hatching success of American dippers. This is the publication that reports and all of that. So that was another application of dippers. So yeah, we did a lot of work over these years. It was fun and interesting work, and really dependent on the people shown here, Christy Morrissey and all her work. She is a professor, been a professor since 2001 at the University of Saskatchewan, very successful. And Veronica was our grad student working on the run of the river. I have a picture of the one working on the Elk River. And then of course, Christine's been involved for the last 10 years at least in all of this stuff. So yeah, so thank you. And hopefully not too late if you want to ask some questions.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask how you attach the thing on the bird.
Transmitters,
Hmm?
the transmitters.
Yeah,
Yeah, these guys, it has a little backpack that goes around. Do you remember? Actually, I shouldn't say it. Were they glue-ons? Remember, Christine? Yeah, so I'm giving you the wrong information. There's various ways to attach them. Sometimes you can have a little, very fine filament backpack that you tuck in under, holes in there, or you can glue it on to the base of the tail. And if you don't want it, need it stay on too long, that's the preferred way to do it, because then it will fall off and not be a problem. So yeah. So what other attachment routes are there? Backpacks, glue on. Yeah, but again, still a backpack or even a glue on. Yeah. And then some birds won't tolerate it at all. So they actually have to be operated on, and they have to be put into the body cavity, you know, with an antenna running out. So I don't think I've been involved in any of those studies. Yeah, you either need a vet or you have to learn how to operate yourself. So it's a serious skill. Backpack attachment is always a technical challenge. How am I going to do this? So, but there's so much you can learn from that technology now. It's all, you don't follow them around anymore. You either communicates directly to a satellite, and then you can download it directly from the satellite feed, or they will communicate with a cell tower. So they fly around, they get near a cell tower, and they will download the data.
so do they still have that long length of thing on them? or
You
is
still
it-
need an antenna.
Yeah,
Yeah. And the other thing they have now is they've developed tiny little solar powered ones. So they'll last for like 2 or 3 years. They have a little tiny solar panel on them. I don't have any pictures of them. Yeah, yeah. So depending on the bird and how easy they are to recatch, some birds are really difficult to recatch. Once you've got them once, they're okay,
could I just quickly read a poem, The Dipper?
absolutely.
Okay. The Dipper. It was winter, near freezing. I'd walked through a forest of firs when I saw issue out of the waterfall a solitary bird. It lit on a damp rock, and as water swept stupidly on, wrung from its own throat, supple, undamnable song. It isn't mine to give. I can't coax this bird to my hand that knows the depth of the river, yet sings of it on land.
Nice.
And I like that poem. I just looked at it now, but in the past, there's another beautiful one, and they're written a long time ago. So it just shows the attention that
Nice.
even poets we'll see in the Dipper.
Are those from Britain?
Well, this one, I remembered it tonight, so I was looking for a different one
Okay,
that talked about it. But I found this one just online,
nice.
yeah.
I'm gonna have to track that.
Not every bird has poems written about it.
No, quite a lot, dude. Eagles have quite a lot.
Yeah,
And songs, popular songs, so. I don't know. It's a good question. What bird has had the most,
poems written.
great European robin? Yeah, nightingale.
Yeah.
Blackbirds,
But that's European, like.
That's the European. Okay, well, if that's no more questions. Exactly, going back probably much longer than that. So probably Roman songs about it, or Chinese songs about the white-throated, so the brown. Okay,
Well, John,
oh, you know what?
I would like to thank you for
Sure.
a really exciting.